for me. And so I want to look together at Isaiah chapter 58, the prophet Isaiah, beginning with verse 9. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry for help, and he will say, Here I am. If you remove the yoke from among you, the pointing of the finger, the speaking of evil, if you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall rise in the darkness and your gloom be like the noonday. The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your needs in parched places. Is there anybody in this room who's ever felt like you're in a parched place? Or even now, you feel like a parched place? Your church feels like it's in a parched place? The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your needs in parched places and make your bones strong. And you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters never fail. Your ancient ruins shall rebuild. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations, and you shall be called the repairer of the breach and the restorer of streets to live in. Would you say those words with me? Repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to live in. That's what I want to be known to be about. The passage begins, remove the pointing of the finger and the speaking of evil. And I think that the institutional church and our current culture is synonymous with the pointing of finger and the speaking of evil. I was listening to a podcast. It was with a church leader, but it was not necessarily a church person. And she says, the meanest comments I get on social media are Christians. Oh, but that's not us. That's the Christians over there. That's those Christians. But what I'm telling you is that the world cannot see the difference. They're standing from afar. They're seeing us, and they're seeing us tear each other down. And I think when we say, we read this and we're like, oh, that's those Christians over there. We make ourselves comfortable when we do that, and we resist the scalpel of the call to repentance. And, we're not that kind of church. But institutional church is having a reckoning. We want people to see the beautiful community, don't we? Do we want people to see that? But they can't see it. And so what are we going to do about that? I think, we're going to have to reckon with our internal preoccupation. That pointing of the fingers and speaking of evil, often that is happening within our systems, right? We're so focused on self-preservation. We're so busy reorganizing ourselves. We've made church all about us. We follow a Jesus who literally emptied himself and who was sent into the world with a mission, who embodied self-giving love. And what we do is we double down in our churches on our own comfort. And we spend copious amounts of time and energy reorganizing our deck chairs. And so what I'm saying is pay attention to the prophet who says life can emerge out of parched places. You will be like a well-watered garden, but not by rearranging your deck chairs. Not like internal tweaks. It is an others-centered focus. Did you see that in the passage? It's when we turn ourselves outward, when we share food with the hungry, when we become repairers of the breach and restorers of streets to live in, that's actually when our bones become strong and we become like well-watered gardens. Brian and I were invited to go into the Presbytery of Transylvania. Philip invited us to do that, and we were in this town in Kentucky, and there's like a church of maybe 12 people. It's 12 people or so, if that. And they were trying to discern: do we have a mission here? Do we have a new mission here? Like they were on the edge of like, are we going to close or are we going to have a mission? And so Brian and I like walked around town and talked to people, and we were trying to get a sense for the town. And we were talking at the Chamber of Commerce and the real estate company and local businesses and people on the street. And people would say, well, why are you asking us all these questions? And we say, well, we're here on behalf of the Presbytery of Transylvania, and we're just looking at the possibility of a new church. And as soon as we said this, it was like you could see people backing away. And then what we'd say is, well, what we know is that what this town doesn't need is another church. Like we've seen one in every corner. There's a church everywhere. You can throw a stone and hit a church. And as soon as we would say, what we know is this church, this town doesn't need another church like we see everywhere. And then we would say, well, we're starting to envision this possibility of a board game lounge, an escape room here in the entertainment district, because we think like families could play together, and it could be a safe place for people in recovery, and it could be a place where those who are young people who are often left out and marginalized in this community could have a safe place to connect with each other. And as soon as we would say that, like people were like, yeah, that's what our town needs. Yeah, that would be super fun. Yeah, like they're telling, and it didn't matter. There were conservative Christians who were like, that sounds like a great idea. And there were progressive Christians who were like, that sounds like a great idea. And there were non-Christians who were like, I would go there. That sounds like a great idea. The energy increased because everyone could see how this could be good for the community, and it would add joy and goodwill in the city. In other words, it could be a restoration of the streets to live in. And the leader of that initiative is in the room today. We have somehow separated the holy from the marketplace as if they are two separate things. Like, unless they're part of the Christian industrial complex, they can't go together. But that's not what we see in the early Christian church. Jesus called fishermen. And sure, they left their nets for a while, but it was through their fishing that they were known and they had relationships. After Jesus' death, what did they do? They went back to fishing. Why do we know that they lugged 153 fish off the boat? Is it because John just happened to like math? Or is it because he knew how many fish he had to sell? When people gathered at Peter's house, it was in a fishing village at the home of a fellow fisherman. Like all the archaeological evidence that is coming out of the work that's been done and what is identified as Peter's home shows that in the years following Jesus' death, like literally the walls in that house got plastered over in ways that it didn't in other places in the area. And the household size of containers and vessels, they transitioned to communal size vessels. In other words, Peter's home became not just a residence, but a place for gathering of the community. And we see Paul, who worked with leather, a tent maker by trade. He was on a mission and his business traveled with him. And in Corinth, he would preach to the Jews on the Sabbath, but then during the week, he would ply his trade and he would intersect with merchants and travelers. And the business, we think of it as like it funded the mission, which it did. But it also gave him a reason to be in the center of commerce, making relationships which he was able to leverage for the sake of the gospel. Lydia sold purple cloth, and when Paul went to the marketplace, he found Lydia, right? And ultimately, as Lydia and her family were drawn to Jesus, they began to offer hospitality to the missionaries, and her business put her in contact with a diversity of people in Macedonia, and that's how the gospel spread on the rails of contacts and connections. Because Paul never saw the church as like the escapist country cottage that we could leave city life and just escape and just be happy together, right? They were the called out ones on a mission and a purpose in the middle of the world. The gospel did spread through preaching. We heard, and we see in Scripture where that happened. And Peter would preach, and many people would come into the life of the gospel. But what we often miss is that the gospel also spread through the natural, everyday relationships and contact points in the village and the marketplace. And there was an era that Christians were like the trade guilds, right? They would meet in common spaces, and they would discuss things over dinner, and they would perform rituals together, and they would dialogue. And the thing about the Christians is that people would come across it, and they're like, well, this looks similar to what the silversmiths are doing and the cloth dealers are doing, except there's something compelling here. There's men and women at the table. There's silversmiths and cloth dealers at the table. There's rich and poor at the table, and they would be invited into it. And it was compelling. And people were like, what's happening here? Because they stumbled across it. Because the church was in the everyday spaces of life. My sister-in-law has been to church 2 times in her life, I think. One was my wedding, and when she came to Christmas Eve services here. That's it. She's not going to wrestle with the question, is there more to life than this, in a Sunday morning worship service? She's just not. But there's a business in Colorado. It's a stand-up paddleboard business. And they go on group paddles, and they wrestle with spiritual questions together. She would go to that. She would stumble across the questions and the conversations there. You see, God is not asking you to copy and paste what you see here at Riverside. You couldn't, by the way, anyway. Because some of you are like, well, we couldn't do this in our church with a steeple. Probably not. Not exactly a carbon copy of this. You didn't have a property that you could sell to buy half of, like everybody's situation is different. But we stepped into this because of who we were and the resources that, were in front of us, the relationships we had, and because we believed that we were called to be repairers of the breach and restorers of streets to live in. So as you think about what unique space God might be inviting you to inhabit, here's just a few questions you can start asking yourself. First, what isn't already there? You don't need to replicate what's already there. If there's several food pantries in your local area, you probably don't need to start another food pantry. The indoor play area here is the only free indoor play area that I know of right around here. It was a ripe opportunity because it wasn't already here. Who are you and what are your natural intersection points? I just met a guy he has an intellectually disabled son. So he has natural intersection points with families with special need children. Well, that's a clue as to what natural relationships are already there. What do you love? What's something, just turn to your neighbor. What is one thing you love to do? I love to cross country ski with my husband in the winter. What do you, it's just one thing, just real quick. There's this amazing community that formed because a guy had a family spice business and he loved to cook, and he gathered together people who wanted to learn how to cook good stuff, and they would get together and they would cook, and then they would share a feast, and they would eat together, and he would say, "Taste and see that the Lord is good." And then they'd have a great meal together. Who and where are your people of peace that resonate with what you're dreaming? For us, it was a title company owner and a coffee roaster and people who love coffee and community leaders who love this idea. Who are your people of peace? And need. Need drives us to do things that we would not otherwise do. When we come to the end of ourselves, right? We're in a parched place. And our tendency is to turn inward, but Jesus calls us to turn outward. Because if we don't make changes, then our impact will continue to decrease. And finances and attendance, they're not everything, but they're often a sign that we're not connecting with our community. So what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? Here, I want to make this disclaimer before I close out. There is not a life of ease and comfort on the other side of these questions, by the way. It's not like a get-rich-quick scheme. This is work. Well, this is work. It's not a cruise. But there is a life of connection and opportunity and restoration and the beautiful conversations of, is there more to life than what we can see right in front of us? Yeah, there is. Or as the prophet says, a well-watered garden. Your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach and the restorer of streets to live in. We're going to give you an opportunity to just have some conversations around your tables. We're going to take a break after that. You're welcome to grab coffee as you need to. There's going to be some snacks coming out here soon, mid-morning. But have some good conversation with others at your table around some of the things that we've started talking about today.